Welcome back, climbers. I'm your co-host, Kaylee Floyd, and this is another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. In today's episode, Bobby is joined by Amira Armond from Curious Solutions. Now today, they are going to be talking about scoping. This is a very important part to the CMMC journey, and we're so excited for you to join us in today's podcast.
Amira, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about a topic that is major critical. Not a lot of people talk about it as much as I feel like they should. And then I think there is some ambiguity, misunderstanding, and a lot of other things that kind of revolve around scoping, but it's such a huge deal, especially from your adoption, cost savings to CMMC, those kinds of things, as well as it can totally tank your assessment if you don't do it right. So thank you so much, Amira, for joining us today. And can you kind of enlighten us your perspective about scoping?
Thank you for having me. So scoping's fun, right? And there's opportunities with scoping to dramatically change your assessment, dramatically change your odds of passing or failing, as well as the cost. Right? And it's definitely worth being creative, not bad creative, but taking some time thinking about all the angles about how you're going to do scoping, because your competitors are going to do that too. Other defense contractors are working.
That's going to affect your price.
Experts. Right. They're working with cybersecurity experts to do this and figure out what network needs to be secure, what networks don't, and that lowers their cost. And now we're, again, same story as always, right? We're bidding against other competitors, and you need to have the cheapest bid to win. Even if everybody now has to have super duper security, it's again going to be cheapest cost wins. So with scoping, there's some cool carve outs that the DoD has given us for CMMC scoping, which is this concept of a contractor risk managed asset and specialized assets, where we don't have to do all the security for those things, because either one, the DoD has decided it's not very important, or on the other side, it's just really hard to do security and they recognize it, and they're not going to cause people to fail because whatever it is cannot be secure.
Yeah, the scoping is such a critical part. At what point do you feel like people should start thinking about that? Because it seems like a lot of people will kind of get in the documentation, they'll start writing kind of their approach to things. Like, can you maybe help me understand at what point do you feel is the right time to start looking at scoping, and what are some factors that you can take about that into consideration?
As early as possible. So the scoping conversation should come in right after you understand what contracts you have and what controlled and classified information you have. And then the next conversation should be, how should we be scoping this thing? Now, It could be that you don't have network diagrams yet, or you don't even understand your own networks. And of course, obviously, we need to understand what we're dealing with today. But the ideal way that you progress on your CMMC journey, right, to get ready, is not that you start running as fast as you can in a certain direction, and then after you've gone a couple miles, look around and go, wait, this is the wrong direction. Right?
I'm laughing too with you because I did that several times. It's frustrating when that happens.
It really is worth it to start and try and get in your brain, right? In one big brain, get all of this understood and start game planning. What happens if this happens? What happens if this plan happens, right? Right now, we don't have to deal with ITAR data, but then the next 6 months to a year, we plan on bidding on a contract that has to do with ITAR. Well, that's going to make a difference to how we want to do scoping. Right now, the only CUI we see, or the only CUI we have to deal with, is a print on a PDF file, which we could potentially just, get a literal printout and keep it as safe at the end of the day. But in the future, maybe we need to be able to export it to a CAD system to create actual detailed specs, or maybe it's going to save us millions of dollars if we can do that. You really need to take that time. And, this is absolutely the case, or the situation where you want to pull in somebody with assessment experience, somebody who's really, really good at scoping, who can talk you through the pros and cons. So, for example, my company, Carry Solutions, we've done at this point 4 joint surveillance voluntary assessments. We're very excited about that. Those are assessments that, according to the DoD, will turn into CMMC certifications as soon as CMMC comes out. And as part of these assessments, very early on, we have a conversation about scoping to make sure that they're not violating boundaries, right? So when we get into an assessment scoping conversation, it's actually more about understanding the boundaries you're using to keep the CUI where it's supposed to be, as opposed to what I've been talking about, which is, you as an organization trying to figure out what systems should have CUI on them, or, how we should secure them. It's actually a different conversation, even though they're both called scoping. But I can give you a couple lessons learned from the assessment side scoping.
Yeah, that would be great. Because like when I went to do it for us, as we were, going down our journey to get ready, and I was super nervous about doing scoping. And I think rightfully so, if it's your first time really going out and doing it. And so we talk with you guys, we talk with various other people to just try to get various opinions on our approach. MSPs and how they do scoping is definitely something that's not on the forefront of the DoD when they were doing a lot of the stuff that they published. So, it was really challenging for us to try to make sure that we were staying in the right approach, so that as we got certified, we would pass. But not only that, we would appropriately be set up to be successful for our clients, which is a huge deal. So those lessons I'm really curious about. So hit me with it.
Okay. So let me strike terror into your heart as an MSP.
Okay.
So this wasn't one of the joint surveillance clients that we accepted. This was one that we actually couldn't take because they had scoping issues. But a defense contractor came to us, say, we want to be assessed. We want to go forward. We're perfect. We're ready. And I said, great. Tell me about your external service providers. Do you have an MSP? See, Bobby's face just went, oh no. So,
yeah.
And they said, yeah, we have an MSP. And I said, okay, does the MSP manage your servers, right? So they had on-premises servers. They had their own network. And it was not very cloud-based. It was actually like an old school network with servers and stuff in a server room. How does your MSP interact? And they said, oh, well, the MSP has a VPN connection to our network. And when they want to patch our servers, they VPN in from their laptop, the MSP laptop, into the network, where they can then pivot to any device on the network. They can ping any device. And they will then do a remote desktop connection to the server to patch it. They'll remote desktop into the domain controller to do stuff. They can connect to the firewall from the inside, right? And I said, whoa, okay, this could be a problem, right?
Fraught with peril.
Because essentially what we're doing is we're taking a laptop, right, or a computer that we have no idea the security on it. They could have viruses, right? It's not managed by this company. It's managed by their MSP. And we're introducing that laptop on the inside where anything could pivot outwards from it, right? If it's being controlled by a bad guy, as soon as they make that connection, it can just go connections to everything. It's inside the boundary. But that's not like, okay, I'm just thinking that, right? This is just a risk. I'm an assessor. I think about this stuff. I go, can you tell me about the security of your managed services provider's network, right? What are they doing for that laptop to secure it? And the client says, I got no idea.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, do you have a shared responsibility matrix? Do you have a system security plan for the MSP's network, right? Have they provided you any documentation about how they're doing security on their network? And they go, no, not at all. Right? So I actually went to the DoD. I didn't name names, right? I just said, look, I got this situation. Normally, if the MSP wasn't putting their laptop into the network, we'd be able to assess it by itself, right? We'd be able to assess that defense contractor's network and ignore the MSP's security. But because they're putting the laptop in, what do, right? Do I have to assess the MSP's network? And the DoD CIO said, yeah, like you can't just assess the defense contractor standalone. You have to know what the security is of that MSP. So they did get an assessment, right? I had to turn them down. I had to say, this is not great. Come back when you know what's going on with your MSP. And honestly, that would have been two different assessments because the MSP's network is completely separate. It's got their own patching, directory, vulnerability scanning, right? Policies, procedures compared to the clients. So it would have been two separate assessments to do that. And that's probably the exact scenario where we get the DoD saying, if you use an external services provider, they have to be CMMC level 2, right? It's that sort of scenario that they're worried about.
Now, if they would have the OSC that came to you, if they would have given that MSP their laptop that they had full control over and said, hey, you now use this whenever you need to get in from our stuff, because then we know what it is, and sign this agreement that says these are the only people that are allowed to access it, and give us some additional information that we want to know, background check about who you are and who's going to be touching those systems, and wrapper that around some risk assessment processes.
They would have been golden.
They would have been golden.
Absolutely. Right. If that is the way you keep external service providers out of scope, right? Especially the MSP type folks or the security consultant folks, is you just say, hey, use my computer, use my policies, procedures, onboarding process. We're going to treat you just like an employee. You're a privileged employee, right? But we're going to manage you using our set of policies and procedures. And that keeps the scope of the assessment inside your company. I've got no problem assessing a company that has their main IT person work for a different company. No problem. Right? As long as that person has been screened, right, has gone through training, has had their rights reviewed, right? As long as they're doing all the CMMC stuff, I don't care who pays them. It's really about whether we're mixing in risk levels.
Right. Now, I would say, as in, putting my MSP hat on here, that helps MSPs get in the door to support an individual, but that doesn't scale very well.
Nope.
If you have 20 clients, you're going to have 20 different laptops. Where are you going to store that at? Like, how do you even do that? So there's obviously some challenge there, but CMMC is in its infancy, and that's definitely a valid approach to try to get your foot in the door and supporting clients. But that's not going to scale very well. So there's alternative ways of doing that. We may, if we have time, get into some of those possible scoping scenarios. Do you think that's a possible thing that we could talk about, Amir?
Absolutely. Yep.
And so that would be kind of cool. I don't know, but I really, I really do want to hear more of the scenarios that, like the real life practical ones, because I think those are so great. So keep going. I just wanted to interject that one point.
Okay. So there's a hot button list of scoping topics that we ask during our assessment scoping call, where hopefully everything has already been figured out, right? We've reached this point. We're a month away from actually doing the assessment. Hopefully the company is ready to go. But we got to check, right? So do you have CUI and email? It's a big one, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you do, how are you keeping that CUI from going on to other devices, right? So CUI and email, you can pass. You can pass with CUI and email, but it's really hard because inherently email is an unencrypted medium, right? By default, when you send an email, it negotiates down to the lowest level of security if needed, and it will send it out unencrypted. And a lot of people are probably listening. If you're an IT person, you're probably listening to this, and you're going, no. Exchange servers can set up a TLS connection between the two of them, and they can do server-to-server transport. Yeah, I get it. Okay, but
I'm going to take the help desk calls when all that stuff starts not working well when they're trying to receive certain emails, which does not sound exciting.
That's the thing, right? So, yes, modern day email servers will attempt to negotiate to a high level of security, right? But if the other side doesn't do it, they will negotiate down to no security, unless you have changed the setting to say don't negotiate down. Now, how do you know that you have set that setting? When your users are going, my emails are bouncing, I can't send emails, life is sucking, right? And you're dealing with a bunch of churn from people who can't get their emails out. If you're not dealing with that situation, if you're not dealing with angry users that can't send emails, then you have not put that setting there, right? And your email servers absolutely will negotiate down to sending stuff unencrypted. So that's one concern, right? That's assuming that your email servers are fully secured themselves, or they're on a FedRAMP cloud, right? Which a lot of them are. But the next concern after that point, after the concern of transport, is how are we keeping end user devices that should not have access to CUI?
Let me just make one suggestion, though, and this is not necessarily a perfect one.
Okay.
Is if you had a separate, enclaved mail server that you then forced it down, you had a separate email address that was specifically to only CUI that is outside of the normal operation that you do. I think, would that make you feel more comfortable as an assessor when they kind of outline that and showed their understanding that they're going about that? Now, that's not perfect from a business process wise. Having two emails doesn't sound exciting, but it does provide you some monicum of way of separating that, right?
So but if you have say a commercial network that's not CMMC level 2, and then you've got a secure network, you absolutely would have that situation of having different email addresses, and that's great. A lot of the issues where the government sends CUI and they don't encrypt it, right? So now they're putting CUI in people's email even if you don't want it. A lot of those issues can be solved by telling the government, hey, this email address doesn't work, send it to this secure one, right? And this is the number one complaint from defense contractors. They say, I can do all the security I want. The government still sends me unencrypted CUI through my email, right? And they just won't stop. I've heard of people actually to the point where they will turn off an email address that's being abused, and they will turn on a secure email address and say, you got to do it this way, right? Of course, that messes up one of your users. But if it's horrible, that's one of the nuclear options you can take.
Well, it goes back to business processes. You're sometimes in certain situations, you're picking the lesser of your two favorite options that you want to sort of go with, but you have to understand the pros and cons when you're doing that. And that can be really difficult in scoping when you're trying to make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. But going back to the user endpoints and email, if you do have CUI in your email, we all know that users like to get email. They like to check their email on the weekends. They like to check their email at home, right? I hire employees, and the same day that I hire them, they figure out how to get to my email from their cell phone, right? This is how people are. It's an expected part of business nowadays. And if you have CUI in email, if it's unencrypted, right, you have to have some block in place to make sure that only devices that should have CUI can get to your email.
Right.
And that's hard, right? And in a lot of cases, you actually don't want to do that because it is so nice to have email on the cell phones, email on the BYOD, so people can do their calendar, right, or respond to messages. Now, the most common solution for that is using S/MIME encryption for CUI messages. So if you need to send CUI across email, you get a digital certificate, you encrypt that message. That message is encrypted it's encrypted through transport, it's encrypted in storage, and the end user devices generally cannot access that message because they don't have the certificate to decrypt it. Right now, if you're a super smart IT person, you can figure out how to get a certificate onto your cell phone to decrypt the message, but you don't want to do that, right? You want to tell people, don't do that, and don't tell users that that's an option. And I've seen plenty of companies get through scoping for CMMC where they have CUI and email, but they use the S/MIME encryption 100%, and they don't give those BYOD devices the ability to decrypt it. And so you can have the best of both worlds, except, if you do have an actual CUI email, you have to go to work to read it, right? Which is probably what we should be doing anyways.
Yeah, it's just amazing how, it seems like a simple thing on a thread you go to pull, just more starts coming out the deeper you start to go, and you just don't really realize how deep that iceberg really is until you smash into it, and you're like, well, that sucks. And so I thank you for sharing some of those scenarios, because I think that hopefully the people that are listening to this can start opening their eyes to some of those possibilities, because you just definitely don't want to find that out the hard way, right? So do you have some other ones that you want to go through, or did you want to switch over to some of those other scenarios we discussed earlier?
Let me talk a little bit about printing. So I'm kind of going through the top 3 or top 5 list of things that get people in trouble during that assessment scoping call. Do you print, right? Do you print CUI? So printing of CUI, the technology is unencrypted, right? Unless you have spent a lot of money on a very, very, very expensive printer, if you're printing CUI, that print job is going across the network unencrypted, and that's a problem from a scoping perspective, because it honestly breaks scoping in a lot of ways, because almost all of our CUI transfers, our data flows under normal situations are encrypted, right? It's encrypted up to the cloud, it's encrypted back down from the cloud, it's encrypted to the email server because we're using 443 or the application security. It's encrypted to the file server because, again, we're using HTTPS or another encryption method. But then you want to print, and now we're throwing CUI across the network, right? If your printing is done inside of a secure facility, not that big a deal, because that network cord where the traffic is passing unencrypted is inside of a secure facility. We're figuring that that's where the security is from, right? We don't need to encrypt everything. We need to make sure it's protected. Protected can mean either encrypted or somebody standing there with a bat ready to take out a bad guy, right? But if you have remote users, if you have people that leave the secure facility, this is where the printing question becomes a real big deal, okay? Because if they go home and then they print CUI and in their home network, we have now put into scope the entire home network, which is not good, okay? Very, very strong probability the home network is not secured up to CMMC level 2.
Yeah, I would say so.
The kids wandering around with a tablet, right?
During a meeting, you're like, yeah.
So you can. What I have seen work in assessments is they just prohibit printing CUI unless it's to a specific printer inside a secure facility, right? Don't print CUI to a home printer. I have also seen that people are allowed to print non-CUI, right? So as long as we don't throw CUI unencrypted across the network, we don't really care if you're printing out financials or, an email or something, right? It's not a big deal. I've also seen that with secure enclaves, if you need to print and they've got printing just turned off entirely, if it's not CUI, you can email it to a different network, right? Email it to yourself on the commercial side, print this for me. And that's, again, not a big deal. We're only trying to protect CUI.
But I think what's kind of important there is, I think some people, especially in ignorance, go into CMMC and they're like, can't we just get compliant, but we still operate the same way that we have operated? It's your job to figure it out. And you're like, no. Like, if you're going to adopt and take on CMMC, your business practices are going to change to some extent. There just really isn't a reasonable way for that to happen, because if you're trying to do stuff like you're saying, I need to print this file that's accounting, well, maybe you have to email it to a different place to do it because of the scoping and the way that you've done it. Those kinds of changes are highly likely to happen when you embrace CMMC. So you have to kind of just expect that and embrace it.
Yeah.
There just is an easy button for CMMC. They're just, I mean, to where everything that you have always done always works the way you want and it's perfectly secure and you pass. It's just, at least I haven't seen that. I don't know. Have you?
So if somebody's been working in highly secure government facilities,
Yeah.
then they're like, oh, this is normal.
Right. That does make sense.
Oh, I have to go through a 15-step onboarding process? Okay, whatever, right? I have to justify every permission I need? Okay, fine. They're lurking over me when I want to connect to my email. Yeah, that's normal.
Right. That makes sense.
But yeah, most of us are not, we didn't come from government. I actually, that experience, that user experience of working in government I actually find it really valuable for an IT department that has to be CMMC level 2, because they're just like, oh yeah, it's just the normal. We have to do all this paperwork. We have to do change approval, meetings. But yeah, most contractors, especially, if this is like, what is this CMMC thing? If that was a big surprise a couple of years ago, I guess the word is technology debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
You haven't been at that level, so it's a big deal to get up to it.
Now, we chose to take the path of just block all printing. I mean, but we did go a situation where our CUI is enclaved and we have our normal outside operational methodologies. So that, just disabling printing wasn't a big deal for us because we didn't really want anything printed that might happen to be in there in the first place. And so that was okay operationally for us. But let's say that that's not the case and that they do want to print from home and they want to be able to do that and they want to pass. Like,
right.
I'm really curious your perspective on how have you seen that and what are some ways that people could do that?
So having CUI in paper form at a home is generally a really bad idea. Let's try and avoid that, right? There's a few cases where you have to do it, but think about people carrying around briefcases, they're locked to their wrists. That's the sort of attitude that you should have if you're taking CUI outside of a secure perimeter. That's the attitude that the DoD wants us to have, right? And keep in mind that CUI can range in true sensitivity from it's a couple of people's personal information, right? Their names, addresses, date of birth, right? Yeah, who cares, right?
It could be plans for an ice maker.
Right. It could be a tire diagram for a Humvee, or it can go all the way to here's a plan for how to build a nuclear missile. Right. Some of the sensitive CUI is really sensitive, and the reason why, and this is Amira's take on it, but the reason why they can't classify it is not because they don't want to. Right? There's a lot of CUI out there that probably should be classified, but they can't get people to make it if it's classified. You know what I mean? Like, the manufacturing factories can't handle classified stuff, so they have to leave it unclassified to get it made.
I never thought of that. Wow, that's an interesting take, and that does make sense because I've heard similar stories, and I'm like, it didn't really make sense, but that does make a lot more sense now.
I think that's the reason. I might be wrong. There might be some expert out there that knows better, but that's what makes sense to me, and that's why we've got manufacturers out there with the full plans for the F-35. Right? It's not because the DoD thinks this is not important, or that it doesn't pose a risk to the United States to have the full plans out there. It's because they need it made. Somebody has to make it.
Right.
So with you mentioned printing, right? You've disabled printing. I do the same thing in my network. My company is a tech company. We're working on, Word and Excel documents and web pages all day. We don't need to print. We really don't. It's a nice to have for us. So I just prohibit printing from our network. However, I do say you can forward an email. If it's non-sensitive, you can forward an email and print it, right? I trust you, user. Use good judgment, right? But it's fine. And of course, we've got data loss prevention, which helps. So it'll catch anything sent out through email. But there are cases where a manufacturer especially really, really, really does need to print. They've got a gigantic plotter that they need to print out and then post it on the wall in their shop. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable reason to be able to print, right? Just control it. Just say, here's the reasons why, use a shop printer. Don't send it to the print shop down the street, right? Which, by the way, that's been a big deal. That's been a big problem where in the past, if you wanted that F18 diagram, you sent it to a print shop, right? Oh,
that's
my
crazy.
goodness, right? Do you know the level of security over there? There is no security. There's no password, let alone MFA or anything else. Which is why the DoD is on our back about this, because they're starting to realize just how bad it's been.
For the home network, though, it presents such a challenge because if you were doing IP printing, right, you're absolutely wire transferring that right across there. But if you were using a printer that was, LPT directly to it, or plug directly into it, there's some possible grace given there, right? But still, how could you slice that bread to pass an assessment with having printed controlled unclassified information in your home? Just pretend that you were able to do it correctly. How could you manage just the paper itself?
For the assessors, it comes back to the exact assessment objectives, right? Which talk about protecting CUI in storage, protecting CUI in your facility. And there's ways to do it, right? It's really about designing a program. We call it administrative controls, where we're going to tell you what to do. You need to do those things, right? But it's not going to be a technical thing. So if somebody does need to have printed CUI or written CUI outside the facility, do we have training that says you need to put a cover sheet on it? Do we have training that says you need to lock it in a locked room when you're not right there accessing it? Do you have a check-in and check-out process? A lot of people, a lot of companies actually will tag their CUI printouts with a unique ID, and they'll have a check-in and check-out process for that. Now, as assessors, we're probably not going to get that deep into it. Unless you say that's how we do it, then we'll be like, cool, show us. But we generally, that's a little bit more than what the minimum is. It's awesome if you do it, but we're not going to go that deep. We're going to be basically saying, how do you make sure somebody doesn't walk into your house and just snag it, right? Or that your kids don't take it to show and tell.
Draw on the back of it like pictures of mom and dad, and then on the other side is the F22.
I when I was a little kid, I grabbed some stuff from my dad. he had a coin collection, and I thought one of his coins would be cool to take to show and tell, which is a school and parent incident of major proportions. So kids do this stuff, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And we can be. It can sound super paranoid, but the little manufacturers out there, you do have to worry about being surveilled, right? You do have to worry about nation state stuff looking at you. You're not too small. It just means you're an easier target.
Yeah. Especially the leaders of the organizations, because you've got to get out there socially. I mean, Amira, same for you. I mean, you're out on social. They know who you are. So they're coming after you. They're coming after me. I have employees, the moment they start and they mark their names as being employed with me on LinkedIn, immediately they start getting texts. That's part of our training process that we go through to teach them. But they're coming after your people as well as you, especially if you're LinkedIn connected or other types of social stuff. They know you and they're coming after you for sure.
And, this is an MSP oriented show. MSPs are a pivot point.
For sure.
And they know that. They know that if they can break into an MSP, they can get access to 100 other companies from there.
And I think this is part of the reason why I so appreciate, and, I'm probably going to take some flack for this, but I was really glad to see that the DoD said, you know what, MSPs, you're going to have to get level 2 too. You're going to have to meet parity with who you're doing. Because I've seen so many MSPs that have not really done a great job, because traditionally MSPs, we struggle with trying to follow our own practices. And to require that MSP to be audited to validate that they're doing the practices they should be doing before they can enter into the DIB and support them, I think raises the bar where it should be, and is a really good call for them. I just wish it would have been done sooner so that we would have had more time to get more of us, through the network, because, with the proposed rule, if it keeps how it is, we're going to have to be level 2 before they can start to do their song and dance. So whoever they pick as their MSP needs to already be level 2 or they can't start their assessment. So, but I thought that was a good call.
Mm-hmm. I understand it. I wish it was based off of access.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a comment I made on the rule, which is instead of doing it by this concept of security data, where anybody who's got a log or a network diagram needs to be level 2, do it based on access, right? The odds that somebody is going to hack you because they got access to your logs, it's a stretch, guys. It's a stretch. It's really a stretch. Okay. But if they have privileged rights to the inside of your network, that's not a stretch.
No,
that's if you compromise them, the other stuff is compromised, right? It's not even an extra step. It's just automatically compromised.
Well, if they took that approach, then MSPs could probably use some other vendors, because more vendors would probably be willing to step into the space if their requirements that they had to fill sort of matched some of that conceptual idea of what their engagement is. That's a whole other Pandora's box, tangled knot to do. So, Amira, is there any other ones, or did you want to go ahead and break out with ye old paint?
You want to see the paint?
I'm looking forward to it.
There's other ones. Maybe we can have another session. I appreciate the opportunity, Bobby.
Well, for all of you that have joined us, we thank you so much. Just go ahead and make sure to continue to connect with us and let others know about some of the great content we've been sharing out here. I mean, there's just so much on this journey. And so we thank you for joining us on it. And as always, keep on climbing.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.